誰だっけ？
もっと戦おう。
This is the Infinity Castle, and it's the home of the strongest in the 12 Kizuki, including the Uppermoons and even the Demon King himself, Muzan. Trying to survive or even just barely escaping the Infinity Castle became the most dangerous mission that the Hashira have ever encountered. But that is exactly what would make this interesting for Maki and Toji. Instead of Tanjiro and the Hashira, we're gonna be sending Maki and Toji Zenin. They're gonna need to find and eliminate all threats within the castle, including the Uppermoons like Akaza, Doma, and even Kokushibo. The castle itself is also controlled by the Demon King, which means that if they want to escape the Infinity Castle, then they're gonna have to beat Muzan. The 12 Kizuki are divided up into 6 groups, being the upper and lower moons, but because the lower moons are honestly not all that interesting and not really why anybody would want to click on today's video, Maki and Toji are gonna be entering the exact version of the Infinity Castle that Tanjiro, Zenitsu, and the rest of the Hashira actually enter towards the end of the story. Just like any other debate, there's gonna be some arguments that make you sort of squint and question if the person who came up with this was using grok, but that doesn't mean I'm gonna avoid bringing them up, and I'll make it clear when something is ridiculous or at least decently acceptable. The first demon to go up against Maki and Toji is probably going to be Kaigaku, who is literally a replacement for one of the Upper Moon demons, but he's still an Upper Moon nonetheless. Just like Zenitsu, Kaigaku can also use some form of thunder breathing. However, techniques that manipulate lightning or electricity can probably be predicted better than most techniques by Maki and Toji's own form of precognition. Heavenly Restriction traded away any capacity that they had for using cursed energy for raw physical power, and granting them not only monstrous strength, but the near perfect body with heightened senses. Their sensory abilities became so extreme that Maki and Toji are now able to feel changes in air temperature and density to predict incoming attacks. Even the slightest changes in atmosphere can tell them exactly how to dodge dangerous attacks and greatly amplify their reaction time. Maki went from being blitzed by Naoya to dodging his fastest rush attack mid-air. Electricity, for example, would make some of the strongest and most extreme changes in air temperature and density. This would mean that Kaigaku's arsenal using thunder breathing is just an overall terrible matchup for Maki and Toji, and it means that his attacks are far more prone to being reacted to compared to just a normal slash. Kaigaku gets absolutely fried and washed by Zenitsu using the 7th form of thunder breathing, Flaming Thunder God, meaning if we find out how fast Zenitsu is moving, it should make everything for Maki and Toji pretty simple. The Demon Slayer series as a whole has many arguments and many showcases where the Hashira and even people like mid-series Tanjiro have pretty good arguments, from being anywhere from barely the speed of sound or Mach 1 to even high-end lightning timers. It's all gonna depend on your interpretation and perspective and blah 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 blah, but since we're just talking about Kaigaku for now, I'm gonna keep it pretty simple. Many people would argue that Zenitsu has been subsonic by some estimates since chapter 23 of Demon Slayer, and most people bring up this calculation done which measures his blitz against the demon in the mansion, which would already place Zenitsu around Mach 1. Then throwing in some other pretty insane speed feats like this demon running through the railway track from the Mugen Train arc, or even scaling Zenitsu to Daki, who outran an explosion by Gyutaro's exchange with Tengen. Years ago when I used to debate Demon Slayer scaling, there was this promotion from Hulu in 2020 trying to hype up Zenitsu's thunderclap, saying that he's moving at 172 kilometers per hour, which if you do the math is really just 107 miles per hour. I'm not gonna take this too seriously, especially because it's really only talking about the anime if anything, but Lightning McQueen might actually just blitz the entire Demon Slayer verse moving at 130 miles per hour. Mitsuri and Tanjiro both have their own lightning timing arguments and agendas using different calculations, which don't just stop at scaling them to maybe Mach 5, 10, 100, or even 1000, and they could be even much higher than that and beyond thousands of times the speed of sound. Maki and Toji specifically have their own showcases of dodging or even reacting to lightning in both the manga and the anime. Toji manages to escape getting hit by the electricity from Megami's Nue, and measuring this feat would place him around Mach 228, but just like Demon Slayer, there's also more higher end interpretations in Jujutsu Kaisen. The most notable lightning timing argument comes from Hikari's feat with Kashimo, and this calculation is pretty misunderstood, but I'll try my best to explain. The calculation is measuring how far Hikari moved his head, obviously using his legs and torso, and it's not the same as measuring somebody throwing a punch or a kick. Just because a boxer can slip his opponent's punches, it doesn't mean that he's all of a sudden just gonna be landing strikes left and right. Hikari does get tagged by the lightning, but it's not because he wasn't moving fast enough, it's because the lightning literally is a sure hit like attack which which means that after it's set up, you literally cannot f***ing avoid the attack once it's fired. Hakari could be moving right here somewhere between Mach 2636 or Mach 4760. You could be skeptical about how real the lightning that Mitsuri and Tanjiro encountered was that's compared and referenced in many of these calculations, but you could really just mirror and make the same argument against Kashimo's cursed energy being actual lightning or electricity and not just cursed energy based electricity or lightning. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to be that skeptical on both sides of the argument. If you did want to compare Hakari dodging Kashimo's lightning to Mitsuri dodging lightning, then Hakari's reaction speed feat would actually be faster than Mitsuri by about 1.2 times to even 2.16 times faster, obviously depending on if you're going to be using the higher or lower end estimate. But overall, dodging lightning seems to be pretty consistent for Demon Slayer characters, and again, not the craziest thing for JJK characters, especially at the higher level like Gojo and Sukuna, but we're not going to be talking about them this video. If you're going to assume that all of the Demon Slayer characters are essentially on acid and they're all tweaking out throughout the series, nothing is real, all the effects are fake, and Zenitsu is like 104 miles per hour according to the Hulu advertisement, then they're just going to get completely obliterated by Maki and Toji being around Mach 5 or Mach 5 plus.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
We'll use the middle to higher end scaling for Maki and Toji and the Infinity Castle Uppermoons. Maki and Toji's combat speed could scale to the Hakari reaction speed calculation using Kashimo's lightning, and also just to make it fair, I'll grant the Tanjiro and Mitsuri lightning timing stuff, and I'm not going to make some argument about how it might not be real and how it's totally imaginary. There's no real way to measure the starting distance between Kaigaku and Zenitsu before he uses Form 7 and obliterates Kaigaku, but this form should obviously be at bare minimum faster than Zenitsu's other abilities or standard combat speed. Maki and Toji should be fast enough to handle Kaigaku pretty easily, especially considering that Zenitsu was already slicing his neck before he can even realize what happened. This guy was getting his neck sliced in the first interaction with Zenitsu, and I really don't even think it's going to be all that close when Maki and Toji can predict Kaigaku's breathing better than other attacks, because obviously a technique called thunder breathing is going to make much larger changes in air temperature and density than other attacks would normally be making. The characters within Demon Slayer generally don't do anything super impressive besides destroying some buildings or making some craters, which when measured could place some of the best like Muzan and the Hashira around town level. Meanwhile, there's gonna be Maki and Toji who not only could survive a Sukuna level Black Flash, but are also implied to be comparable to the other heavy hitting fighters. Yuta and Yuji aren't as durable as somebody like Ryu Ishigori, but seeing Maki tank the cleaves from an arguably stronger Sukuna than the version who absolutely cooked Ryu is a little bit more debatable. But an argument that I honestly haven't heard in a while until Broken Ronin mentioned it in his Demon Slayer video, which you guys should go check out, was regarding Jogo's Maximum Meteor completely destroying Shibuya. According to the fanbook, Jogo wasn't just trying to destroy the city, but literally turn it to ash. Just like Broken Ronin's goated Mike Tyson analogy explained, this would be far greater than just town level, since he's not just causing enough destructive output to level the city, but completely destroy the entire city until there's literally nothing left but dust. Obviously, this would be a feat for 15-finger Sukuna and not any of the heavy hitters like Maki and Toji, but this is where I'm gonna take this argument a little bit further. You could argue that characters like the heavy hitters and Hakari only reach about small town level based on their limited showings, but couldn't possibly be their true strength if you agree that Sukuna is around country level at just 15 fingers of power. Just to put that into perspective, there would be a 1 billion times gap between Sukuna and the rest of the heavy hitters. This doesn't mean that Maki or Toji would now be placed around country level like Sukuna, but if they had to be placed somewhere, then they're more than likely gonna be closer to the country level than small town level arguments, assuming that you don't actually think that there's a 1 billion times gap between Maki and Sukuna. Kaigaku specifically isn't really gonna be much for Maki and Toji to worry about whatsoever. He doesn't have any crazy attack power like Muzan or even a lot of the other Uppermoons, which I'm gonna talk about later, and he is clearly the least impressive among the other demons referenced in today's video. The saving grace for Kaigaku and a lot of other Uppermoon demons might have been their regeneration, but unfortunately for them, Maki and Toji have come prepared with the Soul Split Katana. The blade can bypass conventional durability by cutting the soul of the target and even object directly, and without some form of regeneration to specifically heal the soul, Kaigaku is pretty much cooked. Akaza is the next demon within the Infinity Castle who Maki and Toji will be facing right after finishing off Kaigaku. However, unlike their previous encounter, this match is going to be entirely different. Just like Maki and Toji, Akaza also possesses his own form of precog precognition using his demon art, which takes the form of this compass. When Maki and Toji first encounter this ability, I'm expecting them to be pretty confused, because even if you believe these guys are slightly faster than Akaza, the demon had no problem adapting to his opponents quickly growing in power, like Giyu awakening his Slayer mark, which is implied and shown to be a massive boost to these already lightning timing level fighters. However, the exact effectiveness of Akaza's compass completely depends on his opponent's fighting spirit. Using the compass, Akaza can sense the fighting spirit within his opponents, and when his opponents suddenly surge with fighting spirit, the compass will alert Akaza of any incoming attacks, and stronger fighting spirits can also create stronger alerts to guide the demon swiftly into countering his opponents. But then again, this probably wouldn't work on Maki and might work on Toji, but probably not Maki. Maki was taught during her sumo match exchange with Mio about understanding the human within the ring and leaving the ring, but not literally. When that happens, her opponent will no longer matter, and even winning and losing loses its meaning. Instead, you're gonna feel everything about your opponent and yourself according to Mio. From then on, Maki completely awakens her heavenly restriction and gains the ability to see what others couldn't. I'm not saying that what Maki experienced in the sumo ring is exactly the same as what Tanjiro experienced against Akaza, where he went through some type of mindset shift where he cleared his brain of all distractions and started seeing a world where others couldn't, and then completely started cooking his opponent. But I'm not gonna lie, they are pretty similar. Even if Toji's mindset isn't exactly like Maki, and he doesn't also experience the same thing to a similar degree as what Tanjiro understood, things are gonna play out pretty similarly to the original story. Even if the compass does bring them a little bit of trouble, Maki being able to tap into that state of mind is gonna completely throw off the compass, and Akaza is gonna get cooked by the soul split katana even with his god tier regeneration compared to other demons. The upper rank 2 is Doma, and he's probably the only demon with an ability that could potentially finish off Maki and Toji at the same time. Doma's blood demon art is chirokinetic, meaning that his abilities revolve around freezing and creating large ice structures, which are more impressive than you might think. When fighting up against the demon slayers, Doma's ice Buddha was outputting around multiple city blocks worth of energy with just one blast. You could compare this feat directly to Maki being trapped in Urame's ice during her encounter with Sukuna, and we actually do have measurements for Urame's maximum technique, which when calculated was capable of outputting around 1.23 times 10 to the 13th joules of energy, or 2.95 kilotons of TNT. The ice Buddha was able to freeze large structures and even nearby bodies of water pretty much instantly, just like Urame, but it only released about 567 billion joules, or about 135 tons of TNT. This would mean that Urame's ice structure, which didn't even finish off Maki, is about 21.8 times greater in terms of energy and freezing power. You could argue that this attack wasn't completely directed at Maki, unlike the attack that Doma might create, but not only did Urame admit that she was the main focus and target, but even if you did want to really lowball it and really skepticize exactly how much of this attack was directed at Maki, even just 4.6% of Urame's attack is enough to match Doma's total energy output during the scene with the Buddha, meaning that freezing Maki and Toji is pretty unlikely, and that alone is not going to be able to take down both of these monsters, especially in a 2v1. You could throw in the idea of maybe Doma using some clones, but considering the Buddha isn't really that effective, I don't think the clones are going to be much effective either. What really threatens Maki and Toji within Doma's arsenal is going to be the atmosphere. Shinobu, who just for the record has an extremely advanced understanding of anatomy and biology, was pretty sure that her lungs would literally burst all because of Doma's blood demon art. You could bring up the idea that Maki and Toji just have stronger bodies than the Hashira, and they're known for being physically superior compared to normal humans. Therefore, they would be able to have some better chances against techniques that are only proven to work on people like the Hashira. While Shinobu isn't really all that anatomically impressive compared to Maki and Toji, her lungs are a completely different story. Demon Slayers obviously train their lungs extensively, and Shinobu being a Hashira is definitely not an exception. The ability to perfect your breathing and strengthen your lungs is integral to becoming one of the many Demon Slayers, and especially Hashira like Shinobu. If Shinobu's lungs were literally gonna burst after training her lungs her entire life to become a Hashira, then Doma might actually be able to take down both Maki and Toji at the same time, but that's definitely easier said than done. Maki and Toji aren't just feeling changes in air temperature and density, but Maki also claims to be able to see the facets that are scattered everywhere throughout the atmosphere. This allows Maki to not just visualize the details in the atmosphere, but literally grab a hold and jump off the air itself. Maki and Toji seeing the powder that Doma's gonna spread using his fans would easily allow them to avoid ever having to engage with this extremely dangerous attack. This is definitely the most probable outcome, especially considering the fact that people with normal vision managed to figure this out who are way less intelligent than Maki or Toji Zenin. Unless Doma actually manages to pull off an attack from the inside, Maki and Toji are gonna quickly end the fight with the Soul Split Katana, and that's pretty much it for Upper Moon 2. The second to last round finds Maki and Toji matched up against the strongest upper rank demon, Kokushibo. With 4 different forms and the strongest technique of any demon aside from Muzan himself, Kokushibo is by far the most fearsome Hashira killer among the Upper Moons. If being upper rank 1 didn't already signify superiority among the other 12 Kizuki, here's my little quick Kokushibo agenda and hype train to prove why he's by far the strongest among the 12 Kizuki. An opponent capable of not just blitzing Akaza, but completely stun-locking somebody who's supposed to be the 3rd strongest among the Upper Moons. Buichiro is one of the most legendary prodigies among the Hashira, and he even said that Kokushibo's speed is in another dimension. Multiple guides and editor statements double down on the idea that Kokushibo is the greatest of them all. This statement from the fanbook explained how he was overwhelming the Hashira, and he's called the strongest demon at the end of chapter 164. Using his own 6 eyes, he can see through the world itself, which is an ability only reserved for the strongest demon slayers to ever live. Being the twin brother of Yoriichi doesn't really speak to his insane ability to not just become one of the strongest demon slayers in history, but also strongest demon among the 12 Kizuki in Muzan's regime. Could Kokushibo beat Muzan? Probably not. But he's definitely not going to get obliterated and will last a lot longer than Akaza, Doma, or anybody else in the Upper Moons. Kokushibo's power could be measured based on any of the showings from the rest of the 12 Kizuki or even the Hashira, because not even Gyome could survive an encounter with him alone without the others.
He's a massive guy. This big, powerful guy. This guy is... he is a monster. A giant of a man.
One really large person.
Meaning he should scale far above any of them individually, including Mitsuri, Tanjiro, Zenitsu, or anybody else established to be around that lightning timer or Mach whatever range. Even with Maki and Toji jumping Kokushibo, it's already pretty unlikely for them to keep up with him if you think that them matching Akaza and Doma was already a little bit stretching it in terms of speed. Kokushibo's breathing style is something called moon breathing, which if it couldn't get abstract enough, I actually have no idea what even moon breathing is made out of. Is it made out of the moon? I don't really see any reason why moon breathing wouldn't be susceptible to their precognition, but it just doesn't give off any large changes in air temperature and density that would particularly make it easier for Maki and Toji to detect, like Kaigaku's thunder breathing. One ability which is extremely overlooked and honestly severely underrated is definitely Kokushibo's ability to predict his opponent's attacks. Not only does Kokushibo have his own form of precognition through the see-through world, but it's arguably better than Maki and Toji's. Gyome says verbatim that Kokushibo is predicting every move and he's doing it the moment he thinks of launching a technique. We pretty much had no idea at how this was even possible until Gyome also observes the see-through world like Kokushibo. This is something that Gyome theorizes first, but then he ends up controlling his own blood circulation and ends up landing a major attack on Kokushibo, pretty much confirming that this isn't just a theory and that Kokushibo can actually predict attacks the moment you think of them by observing your blood circulation. Kokushibo being far greater than any opponent that Maki and Toji have already encountered, who are all pretty reasonably lightning timers, along with having his own form of precognition which is potentially even greater than Maki or Toji's, makes this fight pretty one-sided in everything but attack potency. Unless you think that Maki and Toji are already comfortably lightning timers and decently above the other Upper Moons like Akaza, and that the gap is big enough to make up for the fact that Akaza was literally getting blitzed by Kokushibo, then Maki and Toji are gonna eventually find an opening and end up beating down Kokushibo like they did with every other Upper Moon and finishing him off with the Soul Split Katana. Muzan is the final antagonist of Demon Slayer and the final antagonist of this video. He's the last demon for Maki and Toji to face within the Infinity Castle, and he is near objectively stronger than all other of the 12 Kizuki. He can overwhelm Gyome and Sanemi even worse than Kokushibo, and in fact he can take on all the Hashira even with their Slayer marks activated at the same time. He's got 7 hearts and 5 brains, along with blood capable of poisoning Maki and Toji, which could be mixed into Muzan's attacks, making him even more deadly. Not that it really matters because Maki and Toji are just going to use the Soul Split Katana, but Muzan's regeneration is on another level. Along with the infinite stamina for literally taking on the entire verse in one night, Muzan would definitely outlast both Maki and Toji, whose regeneration seems pretty meaningless in comparison. Tanjiro says that his eyes can't even keep up with Muzan, so that should give you a pretty good idea at the massive gap between people like Akaza and people like Muzan. Maki and Toji won't get completely obliterated by Muzan, Muzan slashes, but it's pretty inevitable considering that the poison causes cell destruction. Even if you do want to take the highball interpretation of Maki and Toji being about 2.5 times faster than the Mitsuri feat, you either have to agree that the gap between Muzan and Mitsuri before the Hashira training arc is less than 2.6 times, or Maki and Toji pretty much get outsped and pretty much get fried by Muzan and the poison. Let me know what you guys think down below, and honestly, just have a great day. Thank you for watching, and drink plenty of juice.